Welcome to another episode of Between Two Amps. Today we're doing something a little bit different. We kind of got into the conversation with our guest today. So this is kind of the intro before the intro, if you will. Today our guest, he's been in so many bands. I'm sure you've heard at least of one of them, but he's been in Cheap Sex, he was in The Generators, US Bombs, played with Murphy's Law for a little bit, and Faster Pussycat, LA Guns. We have a very special guest, and his name is Ace Von Johnson. This week, it was such a great conversation that went on for a good while. So rather than edit out and try and get it down to just a fraction of what we talked about, thought this week it would be great to split it up into two parts. So it'll actually be 2 weeks of episodes. So we've got this week talking with Ace from his beginnings all the way through start of US Bombs and his relationship with Dwayne Peters, and then we'll pick it up again next week with him continuing on his journey, and also some great talk about what it takes to continuously reinvent yourself and get new gigs and ink out a career in playing music. So hope you enjoy the episode.
He was looking for a life that would give him the feeling of being worthwhile.
I don't know all of our age differences. I just turned 39 like 2 weeks ago. So like my induction into the scene was like the very, very end of the 90s. I mean, I graduated in 2001. So I'm technically a millennial, which depending who you ask could be a good thing or mostly a bad thing. But
it is what it is.
It is what it is. We moved from the Valley to San Diego when I was 14. So from 14 to 19, I lived in northern San Diego. So most of I got turned on to like punk rock when I was like 11. So when I moved to San Diego, I remember my first day of school, I was either in 7th or 8th grade. I showed up wearing a Misfits shirt. And this was before the reunion. So this would have been like 90, around then, but it was definitely before you could get Misfit stuff everywhere. And I remember like two guys coming up to me, and one guy was like, "I like your shirt, we should be friends." And he had like long straight hair, and he was like wearing like an obituary shirt. And then it was 8th grade, that's what it was. And then there was this jock kid who walked up to me and called me like the F word that you can't say, and I don't mean fucker, and total like jock rock, like I think about some of these things sometimes only because there was an interesting sort of arc in my career where not once but twice I got to be in a band that was the favorite band of a bully of mine as a child.
Oh my god, that is
so like there's this weird cyclical thing that you don't get to talk. I mean, this is a perfect example, obviously, just shooting the shit, but like it's not like you're out on tour and you're thinking like, I showed that guy, but once every like 3 years it comes up and I just go, oh, that's hilarious. So the guy, I'm not gonna say his name, I think I remember it though. This guy's name was Joe, and he was like a jock and he used to beat me up, or like as much
like,
as you do in like shoulder check and all that stuff. And his favorite band was Unwritten Law, and they were like a San Diego. They were big at that point, but they were like homegrown San Diego pop punk, whatever you want to call it. Who I would eventually, many years later, play guitar for briefly, and And I just always thought that was funny. But there was a turning point, maybe about a year later, and I don't this doesn't even matter to anything, but there was a Misfits tribute album who is still arguably, I guess, like one of my favorite bands, I guess.
Okay.
And as I look around looking at like Misfit stuff all over my room,
I
almost
guess.
30-year-old man, you know. But there's a tribute album that came out that had like the Bouncing Souls and No Effects, but Pennywise and like a couple other bands like that. So all of a sudden, when I showed up, when I had a devil lock in like 8th grade,
Yeah.
and this guy's pulling it and punching me in the arm and calling me all kinds of terrible things, the next year, all of a sudden, that band was cool. And that like, oh well, Pennywise covered them, so we like them now. So your stupid hairstyle is cool now. We appreciate you. But so I did cut my point from an hour ago. Is I cut my teeth in San Diego, and I went to briefly for about 2 years a school called Poway High, which is where Blink 182 came from, where Unwritten Law came from, Sprung Monkey. There were a bunch of other bands. There was a band that was really big in San Diego that never really broke mainstream called Agent 51. That was sort of like somewhere between Rancid, Blink, and AC/DC. And I started at 15 roadieing for then. I mean, I don't mean a tech, I mean like a roadie, like carry this drum kit to the drummer's mom's house. And I really I learned a ton between like 15 and 16. It was mostly because my first girlfriend's older brother skateboarded with this whole crew of guys in San Diego in Poway called CPK, and Unwritten Law had a song about it called CPK. It stood for Crazy Poway Kids, and it was the trailer park kids. Actually, you know who came out of that scene too is the Locust. Brandon Serbian. He went to Poway High School, and his older brother, the Serbian brothers. Those guys, all that was like super adjacent. You guys would know who that is. A lot of my fan base is like, I don't know what the fuck a Locust is. Cattle decapitation, all that was going on. There was a scene, this sort of post, like once Blink got signed, and then they threw Scott Schreiner or whatever out, and then he started another. But there was this big scene, and I kind of got the tail end of that. But it was very grassroots and pre-social media. Of course, there were like .coms, but that was it. So everybody was like tape trading and CD trading and compilations and flyering, and I just working for this band. I mentioned Agent 51. The singer's still like kind of like my big brother. They signed to Adeline, which was Billy Joe's little vanity record label. And so I must have had my driver's license for 6 months. I was 16. I'm like driving them in their shitty 72 Econo line, like up to the Bay Area. We broke down twice, but I'm like watching them ink this deal and then like immediately regret it, like all this stuff. So I learned real quick about like what you guys already know, but like start a band, write some songs, make some flyers, make a tape, get in touch with local promoters. And I started my first real tangible band on my 17th birthday. So that would have been 22 years ago last week. And so it was what year would that have been? That would have been like 2000, 2001. And I hit the ground running, and within 6 months we were playing with national acts, and I was booking shows. I was bringing I trip out. I booked the first show for a band called Underminded. They were our buddy band. Their drummer Mike would play in my band, and then that band splintered off into another band called Early Times, and Underminded and Early Times developed, and guys left, and blah blah blah. And now you have Pierce the Veil. It's the Fuentes brothers, which were Early Times. And then I haven't talked to him in years, but Nick, the singer of Underminded, is now in Sleeping with Sirens. So like a lot of these, I don't know what to call that genre. I just call it like Warped Tour music. But
That's the perfect genre. That's a perfect name. That's what I was gonna call it too, because I have no idea.
It's appropriate, and like these sort of like early 2000s, like I don't want to call them like emo rock, but like indie emo, like
alternative press rock is what I
alternative press rock. Yes, exactly. And like my buddy Christian, who's now in Black Veil Brides, like these guys I knew when we were 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, that are now in these, larger younger demographic bands. I always kind of trip out at where at like 18, 19, I must have made some left turn and they stayed on basically their trajectory. Because I remember everybody was really into Alkaline Trio, and I was like, yeah, they're great, but if I want to listen to that, I'll just put on the Misfits, like whatever. And I don't even know if I'm answering hitting the topic here.
Well, I'm curious. So you started roadieing at like 15, but like, what was it that got you into like? So was that just something you fell into, or like, did you have like instruments at home, like family that was playing music? Like,
no.
what kind of inspired you to kind of want to start playing, or did like punk come first and you saw like you're talking about like all of this DIY stuff happening, which is rad, like to see everybody doing shit for themselves. Like what was it? Yeah. Okay.
It was totally the latter. I have a much older, don't tell her I said that, a somewhat older sister and half sister. And so she lived through LA literally in the 80s. And so she her favorite band was The Damned, and she interviewed Henry Rollins for her high school newspaper and all this stuff. So when I was like 10, and that would have been like 92, 93, and the biggest band on earth next to Guns N' Roses was probably Metallica. They were everywhere.
Yeah.
And so that Black Album, it was like, you're a kid in the suburbs, here you go, here's your copy of the Black Album, go forth and conquer. And so some neighbor kid gave me a copy, it was like, I heard this song about the Sandman, and gave me like this copy of a copy of a copy, and off I went. And I remember, I think for my 11th birthday, someone gave me a coffee table book on Metallica. And this was way obviously before the internet and social media and Spotify and all this garbage. I know you guys know that, but some of the people listening might not remember. And I had this coffee table book, and I'm looking through it, and almost every photo, someone was wearing a t-shirt from this band called the Misfits. And I was like, what the fuck is I'm assuming I can swear. What the fuck is Misfits? What is this? And not to go off topic, but my relationship with my father was pretty minimalistic. And as a kid, it was based solely on our mutual interest of horror movies. And so I'd go visit him, and he'd be like, you ever seen The Thing with Two Heads? Or like, you ever watch, Blood Feast? Or you ever heard of Vincent Price and House on Haunted Hill? And I'd be like, no, but I have a feeling you're about to show me. And so that was my early childhood, and that was sort of like the only male influence I had, aside from like us going out to the Mojave and like shooting guns and riding motorcycles. And that's a whole other show into itself. But like, so when I discovered, and I was just talking about this, I think with if you know who Jeff Kresge is, with him talking about like the paradigms between Kiss and the Misfits. And like as a kid in the 90s who's sort of weird and outcast, divorced parents, all that shit. And I discovered this band on the heels of Metallica, and I was like, wait a minute, so they're angry and they're pissed off, and I'd already discovered the Ramones and all the sort of obvious bands.
Yeah.
And then I was like, they're pissed off, and their songs are only 72 seconds long. But wait, 70 seconds long, but their songs are about these weird movies that nobody I know in my little 5th grade social circles ever heard of. And like this light bulb went on, and I was like, this is it. This is my fucking band. This is for me. And then of course your repertoire expands. And then I went sort of backwards, and I was like, my sister was like, okay, now you're 13 or 12. It's time for you to discover the Damned, young man. And I was like, wait a minute. So they're like a British version of this, like spooky, but angry, but and so all that was going on. And then I moved to San Diego, and I was, sort of a total weirdo and loner. And I had like my first little high school girlfriend, and I mentioned, and we're still still acquainted. I talk to her maybe once every year or two. And her older brother was like 20, and I was 14, 8th grade or 9th grade, going into high school maybe. And her older brother was like this skateboard, just, do nothing, live at home till I think he still lives at home, and he's got to be in his 50s now. Hey man, it is what it is. But And he was like, "You got to meet my buddy Chris. He's got a band." And he liked me because I was the younger sister's boyfriend and I liked the Misfits. So they introduced me to this guy, Chris from Agent 51, who I still talk to all the time. And he was like, "I've got a band. We're playing the Elks Lodge in a month. You want to come hang out and like help us hump Marshall cabinets?" And I was like, "Fuck yeah, I do." And that was how I got my foot in the door. And like I said, and I was a child. I didn't even have my driver's license then. And started meeting band dudes in San Diego and guys from LA. That's when I first met Ron Martinez.
Oh yeah.
You know, and going to shows at the Showcase Corona, and you know, and then I just got really into the punk rock scene and tried to be the consummate diplomat. Like, they're like, "Okay, we're booking a show. It's something corporate and I'm trying to think like as weird as possible, and POD and swindle." And you know, POD didn't have like a deal yet, and it was just like, "Okay, sure." And you'd go, and everybody was there was a like a scene, and it was really cool. So by the time I started my first band, which was called PBR Street Gang, which we took our name from Apocalypse Now, which we shortened to just PBR because there was another PBR Street Gang in the Bay Area that was like a cowpunk band. And the guy sent me an email. It was like, "You'll change your name. We're going to come down there and kick your ass."
Oh my
And I was
God.
like, "I'm 17 years old. I don't want any part of that." And so it just made it easy because people were like, "Oh, you're going to go see PBR." And within a year, within one 12-month cycle of being a band, by the time I was 18, we were supporting the Misfits in whatever bullshit incarnation. We were playing with, you know, the UK subs are coming to town. We want you to support, because we were this band that sort of could play with like these Undermined and these sort of poppier Warped Tour-y kind of bands. But then we could also play with like the Bouncing Souls, or I must have brought the Youth Brigade down probably 3 or 4 times. We played with Swingin' Utters 2 or 3 times. And, you know, on my first tour, I stayed at Greg McGinty's house in the Bay Area. I was still in high school. I was 17. I didn't fucking know.
What was your first like? What was your first like gear that you got? Like
gear wise? Oh man,
yeah. Like, what was your first like guitar? Like you're like
So I'm going way off the deep end here. My first guitar was, and there's pictures of it somewhere. I had what is it? Aria Pro 2. It's like a James Hetfield, like an Explorer type body.
Yeah.
It was like sparkle white, and I bought it at a pawn shop.
Fuck yeah.
For like $1.50, and I just remember I just wanted it because I was still in that phase of like somewhere between liking Metallica but the Misfits, but then like whatever else was going on. I was way before I was in a band, so I must have been I think I was 14, and so I was like, well, I could play a Carcass cover with this guitar, but I could also play like in my Misfits fake imaginary tribute band with this too. And I could just pretend to be James Hetfield. And so I spray painted it matte black, and of course I lent it to a friend and never got it back. And so that went on for probably like a year. And my mom, I got grounded for buying a guitar. I haven't told this one in a long time. I came home with it because my best friend, who I mentioned earlier, this kid Tyler, the long hair, the death metal shirt, we were like Beavis and Butthead, but we were a little bit yin and yang. Like he was like, well, Black Flag's cool because of Henry Rollins and Rollins band, and Misfits are okay because Danzig, but every other punk band sucks. And I was like, yeah. I remember blowing his mind when we watched like some Cannibal Corpse video and the guitar player had a Dead Kennedy sticker on his guitar. I was like, see, they get it. And I bought this guitar with like my allowance money, and my mom freaked out. Like, she was like, "You're gonna start a band and you're gonna do drugs and you're gonna overdose and die, and I won't have it in this house, young man." And I
had the same conversation.
What's that? Go ahead.
I had the same conversation with my dad, but it was over Jackson King V Dave Mustaine signature model. He saw the shape of it. He's like, "And you can't have that guitar because anybody that has that guitar is gonna do drugs and have tattoos." I was just like, he wasn't wrong.
He wasn't wrong. says the heavily tattooed guys.
That's why you never start off with a metal guitar. So you always start off with either a Fender or a Gibson.
Yeah. Well, where it really, really went back to was my mom was a total hippie and lived through the 60s in LA. Like when people were like, oh, did you move to LA to make it in the music business? I'm always like, well, first of all, if this is me making it, I'm fucked. Second of all, I'm second generation Angelino or whatever you want to call it. My mom used to see the Doors at the Whiskey a Go-Go. Like that's how legit, right? And so she had this piece of shit nylon string acoustic guitar, and I would pull it out and make noise with it, 9, 10, 11. And they finally bought me, my stepdad bought me some, no name acoustic. And I learned some cowboy chords, a G and a D and an A. And I was like, okay, I can make some Ramones songs. And that was where the electric guitar want stemmed from.
Right.
And so my stepdad was like, you're being ridiculous. He bought the guitar with his own money, let him keep it. And then once she discovered that I needed an amplifier to make noise, I was allowed to keep the guitar, but I wasn't allowed to have an amplifier.
Oh.
And so that went on for about a solid year. And unbeknownst to her, for like that whole time, once I discovered that this karaoke boombox I had a 1/4-inch input, the same way like a guitar input had. And then the second she'd go to like yoga or the grocery store or whatever, I'd plug my guitar into this karaoke boombox and turn the gain and reverb all the way up, and I'd be like playing like Moon Over Marin or like Sedated or whatever the hell it was. And the second I heard the garage door open, I turn it off and put it all away. Be like, nothing's going on here, Mom. That's how secretive my playing was. You want to talk about gear? And then same thing. I saved up for a while, and the first thing I ever bought that was a legitimate amp was a crate. God bless them, a crate 212, like the gray and the blue trim with all the effects built in. Yeah. But it was loud, and it was good enough to. By that point, I was like jamming with drummers.
Yeah.
And as long as it was loud enough to compete with a drummer, that was all that mattered to me.
Yeah,
and
totally agree.
It did the job, and actually, that amp is what I used to record one album and one album only, and it's the Launch Off to War debut album from Cheap Sex on Punkcore Records.
Really?
Yeah, it was supposed to be a demo, and that comes a little bit later. I think I was 18 then. I was out of high school, but I don't think I turned 19 yet. And I was 18, and I put this band together around Mike Virus from Philly. And we were recording what was supposed to be a demo, and I had a whole Marshall rig by then, but I didn't want to drag it down to just do some throwaway demo. So I used this crate combo amp. It turned out to be like they're doing their 20th anniversary tour of the album now, and like all this, playing the album cover to cover. And it's me at like 18 just ruining these songs that we co-wrote with like this on a crate amp, which is like the worst sounding thing I could think of ever. But the same thing, I saved up and I bought a Marshall JCM 900 50 watt, and I have no idea what happened to that. And that was, I had a band and I was, say again?
It's a great amp.
It's a great amp. It's a killer workhorse. But by that point, my band was doing okay. I remember about a year in, I was able to quit my weekend job, and I moved out. I think I moved out of my mom's house when I was maybe just turned 18, and moved in with some friends down in Hillcrest in San Diego,
cool neighborhood.
Yeah, like the gay quarter with all the record stores. And I'd go down to Record City, and Rob Halford would be walking around, and it'd be people doing drag contests and cool, weird, artsy stuff. And then I was out, and I was just like, I'm in a band now, and I was making enough money to live. And I had a side job on the weekends, working at Tang Records.
Really? They were based out of San Diego?
What's that?
I didn't know they were based out of San Diego.
Yeah, Curtis Casella, good old Curtis from Boston, New York.
Yeah, I was like, I thought they were Boston.
He's been in San Diego since the 90s.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so between my band, my interest in DIY punk rock ethics and all these other little facets. By the time I was 19, like I was like, like king shit. Like I just was like, bands would want to come to town, and I'd call the venue and I'd be like, we want to be on the show. And they'd go, okay, you're on the show.
Yeah.
And in about a 9-month window, I got asked to join all these bands. I got asked to audition for One Man Army from the Bay Area, which was another Adeline Records band that I was a big fan of. I later on played with the bass player Heiko in the U.S. Bombs, he's no longer with us. But them, I got asked to join a band called the Generators out of L.A.
Yeah.
Another TKO band. I think Lower Class Brats were on TKO by that point.
Yeah. I know those guys. They're actually old neighbors of mine in El Sereno. So.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Some of them I talk to, some of them I do not.
Yeah,
but it's just life. But them and then Madcap out of Burbank, who were on Side One Dummy, and then I had just started Cheap Sex, and PBR was still a thing, and I was like, I was 19. I think I just turned 19, and all this was going on, and I was like booking shows, shows at the Elks Lodge, and booking shows at the Epicenter in Mira Mesa, and Ron had me help him with shows, and then Ron would put me on shows. Ron put my band, he put PBR on like a leg of leftover crack shows, which should have been really hard for us, but we were just rancidy enough to like it went okay.
Well, didn't Tony Tony Brummel say that you guys were going to be the next Rancid?
I'll come to that. So that up to that. So all this stuff was going on, and I cut my teeth. I'm still really, not to toot my own horn, I feel like I've just been doing that, but I feel like I learned so much between like 16 and 19. That's like stuff I still use to this day, like engagement wise and DIY, and like, having a Patreon now and doing like, meet and greet stuff in bands where they weren't going to do meet and greets. I was like, well, then I'll do my own, and just making it having to do stuff where, unfortunately the music business, it's right there in the title. It's a business. And so being what is now a career musician of 20 plus years, I mean, I haven't had a day job in 15 years. Yeah. And so with that comes the responsibility of like, okay, I need to try to apply myself for more session work, and I need to, work harder on this Patreon thing or whatever it was before, my roadie for a day stuff. But all that mentality, I think personally, I can't speak for anyone else, but for me, came from being like 17 years old and being like, how do I get on a tour? How do I make this happen? Somebody put us on tour with Menace, the British punk band, and then they couldn't get over from their visas, and I was devastated because I was like, we're going on tour with Menace. I'm going to sing GLC with the band every night, and I was still in high school, and so it's cool to look back on that stuff. But as far as gear goes, once I think my mom saw that I was like getting serious with it, they bought me this really nice Gibson Junior. I think for my 17th birthday. I think it coincides with me starting the band, because I know when I started the band, I had the guitar, and I think, I don't, not to get all super personal, I think it was partly my dad had just passed away, and I think my mom was like, I better do something really nice. He seems to be really interested in doing this music thing, because my mom did not want me to do, my mom, she's gone too, but like did not want me to be a musician. She was like begging me to go back to school, and she saw a psychic when she was pregnant with me who told her I was going to be an attorney, which interestingly enough, she married my stepfather later on, and then his son became an attorney. So she kind of had a son then.
There you go.
So the psychic wasn't really wrong if you're, into that stuff. So, and that was like the threshold of all that. And I still to this day, admittedly, I'm not a gear guy. I'm not like an audiophile. I found a format that worked at 17, and I'm literally looking at 6 Gibson Les Pauls I could touch them. I was like, Gibson, Marshall, plug this into that, and off you go. Like it's It's not broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, we were having that conversation the other day with somebody. I was like, it sounds good. Like, I'm not an audiophile either, and like a gear person. It's like I'm always trying to, like, if there's something new that could help me write better songs, then, or like, you know, sometimes you'll pick up a guitar and it just plays different, and then you'll be like, oh man, I can, like, and then you write stuff that you didn't think you would write, you know?
Absolutely.
But
that's
like
that's the
live,
glory of that.
yeah. But like live, it's like, okay, this band requires this. There's no reason for me to go out and change that sound, you know?
Yeah. I the first time I encountered that, and I'll come back to the Tony Brummel thing. So I ended up joining the Generators and Madcap simultaneously. And the Generators thing didn't initially work out, but because I sort of put my eggs all in the Madcap basket. And we had just finished the Cheap Sex album, so I basically had to walk away from this project that I had kind of put together around this singer guy who we're still buddies. I talk to those guys all the time, but like, you know, I felt like I was letting them down. And but I was like, this band's got this tour and then another tour, and they've got a record deal, and Mike had already preemptively said, you know, he's got a career doing whatever he does, and that this band, that's why he left the Virus, because he couldn't tour. And I was like, look, man, I'm 19. I want to go on the road, and you can't do that. So I'm going to join this other band. And I joined Madcap, and we did most of the second album tour cycle for Side One Dummy, and we went out with fucking everybody. And from dates on Warped Tour to going out with, like, we went out with Fall Out Boy. We went out with, God, I can't even remember now, Dropkick Murphys, and all this stuff. And then we signed to Victory. And we were in Chicago, and we were playing the Metro, which, as I'm sure you both know, it's a legendary theater. I mean, that place is such a glorious old venue. And I knew it because that was where Sam Hain did their, like, Blood show in the 80s. And
there's been a lot of legendary shows at that place. Like, crazy.
For sure, for sure. I don't think I've been back there since my punk rock days, but I would love to replay that place. But Tony, I'm not going to get into why we got dropped from Side One Dummy, but let's just say it involves us doing an April Fool's prank on the two guys that run Side One Dummy, and they have, on a scale of 1 to 10 on a sense of humor, they're in the negative numbers scale. So we got dropped from Side One Dummy. And Joe Sib, if you're listening to this, I haven't forgotten. You have the worst sense of humor for a stand-up comic I've ever heard. But so we played a prank. We got dropped. It was devastating to them. I didn't care. I'd been in the band for like 6 months, and you know, they were like, "You'll never get signed. You know, you'll never work." Literally, I've never had anybody tell me that I'll never work in this industry again. But sure as shit, they said it. So you put me on record for calling them out on that. But I was 19. I was like, oh, you know, it's like watching my singer cry, being like, "Oh, we're fucked. And I'm going like, "What?"
Like, well, right, whatever.
What are we doing here, buddy? And we went and played Chicago, and Brummel was there, and he put me and the bass player in a headlock, and he goes, "You guys are gonna be huge. You're gonna be bigger than Rancid. Rancid's gonna be opening for you." And it's like it was last week. I'll never forget that. And I didn't I didn't know the magnitude of Victory Records. I knew the bands that were big, but I didn't know that a lot of them were on Victory. I wasn't thinking about it in my peripheral about like Taking Back Sunday and Thursday and all this other stuff, because that wasn't my music. It had nothing to do with me. And so we signed, and we went, and I remember our signing thing. It was like us and like Hawthorne Heights and maybe Spitalfield, and then we took Bayside out on their first tour, and like now I talked, and then I didn't talk to Jack. Speaking of pedals and gear, the guitar player for Bayside is like a total gearhead. You should have him on, and he makes pedals now. And then we didn't talk for 15 years, lost touch. Found it, you know, social media, got back in touch, and now we go out and get whiskey drunk all the time because he's here in Nashville.
Oh, okay.
And same thing where he's like, "Dude, I can't believe you're in LA Guns, bro." And I'm like, all right, I don't know. And then Madcap went out, and we did our thing, and we did our record for Victory, which I still think is a really great, like the Clash Elvis Costello, The Police meets the Bouncing Souls meets Rancid meets what's going on at the time. We did this album with Ted Hutt, who went on to do, I think he won a Grammy. I mean, he did Gaslight Anthem and Dropkick Murphys and all these. He went on to do bigger things. But I knew I had a point to this. Ted was the first guy. He was my producer, and again, I was maybe 20, maybe. I was in Madcap about a year. We did this Under Suspicion album. It's the first guy to go, okay, and he's got this English accent that I'll spare you the impression of, but he'd go, so you got this melody line, and that's cool, but what if we put a chorus pedal and a delay and did this and this, and I was like, what? Yeah. You could do that? Like, only thing I knew about was a wah pedal, you know? And so he brought out, we were at God, what was the studio? I don't think it's there anymore, but it used to be.
I was just gonna ask you, is it in Chicago or?
No, this was in Burbank, Los Angeles, like Burbank, North Hollywood. It's not there anymore, but do you know, you guys are in LA now, do you know where Lancashire meets Magnolia and all that? And it's that weird like 6-way intersection.
Yeah.
And there's that, maybe it's not there anymore, Pitfire Pizza or something like that.
Yeah, I remember that corner.
That corner, Pitfire Pizza shared a wall with what used to be IRS Records in-house studio. And so it was like, you'd go in there and it was like Generation X and like all these 80s just weird, you know, like Lords of the New Church and like weird whatever avant-garde stuff IRS put out, Fine Young Cannibals, and like platinum records and recording certificates on the walls. We did most of the album there, and I'm sure I could look it up if only there was a device in our hands that answered.
Yeah, exactly right.
And we did most of the album there. I think we did the drums at some place really fancy in the Valley. I can't remember though. And it's been 20 years. And he pulled out this big box with all these pedals and all this crazy stuff. And it was the first time someone had presented formally to me, like, okay, so this, you get your modulation, and this is an octave pedal, and this does this, and this does that. And then we did this record with all these effects on every song. And then he was like, so you're going to have to replicate those live. And I was like, fuck, because that was an expense. You know, I was like, but you're a kid. And I was like, and I had to borrow, I think like $300 or $400 from my parents. Cause I was like, you know, it's like, look, we're going out with whatever big tour. And we're going out with Simple Plan. And I was like, I'm gonna need all this stuff. And I was like, I don't have, you know, because what's an average pedal, like 80 to 100
$150?
Yeah.
$50, yeah.
Even 20 years ago, it was still like $8, $100 a piece. And so I came back, I think I had a budget of like $350, $400. I came back with a chorus, a delay, this really nice Holy Grail reverb, and like a Blues Driver Boss, one of those blue bricks. And maybe a wah pedal or something. And I was like, there we go. I'm good to go. We're ready to rock this shit. And that was the first time I was in a band where I had to have like a pedal board and have other shit besides a fucking tuner and a guitar and an amp.
So I had the same experience. Like my introduction to like having pedals in a signal chain was through recording as well. It was Brian McTurnan, who's done like, you know, he Thrice, Cave In. He did the first 2 Darkest Hour records, and he was obsessed with the Green Line 6 delay pedal, the 4-pedal thing, and just doing all sorts of crazy shit with that. And we're like, this is amazing. And I was like half paying attention to what was going on. And I was like, oh shit, like we've got to do this now.
Now you have to replicate it live. I think about 2 years later, I was probably like 22, and I was playing it doesn't matter who I was playing with, but I was playing for an artist who had a full on lockout, and she was on tour with her husband. Fuck it, I'll just say. So the band, the Bouncing Souls, the singer Greg and his wife Shanti, she sort of was like a pop Sheryl Crow, punky kind of thing. We did Warped Tour and all this stuff.
Uh-huh.
And I was her guitar player. And she was off traveling with him. And that us had a lockout. And I, in one of my, as I'm sure we can all relate, being a career musician now, in one of my stints of being homeless, or whatever it was you want to call it, in between places, I lived in this rehearsal space for like maybe a few months. And
you're one of those guys.
yeah, I was one of those guys, but I didn't have, there was no nothing, you know. It was like I had a laptop and maybe like 10 DVDs, and I just put them on the background and play guitar. And that was when I was like going from being like, okay, I play guitar in these stupid punk bands that don't require a lot of talent. And I'm 22, maybe 23. I was like listening to more rock, and I wanted to be a better player. So all I did was Woodshed. And I remember I had these 2 Guns N' Roses, the Use Your Illusion era DVDs, and I just would play along over and over. But also, I had nothing to do, so I started like, I didn't have it, but someone in the room had one of those. Was it a Line 6, the green, the modulator?
Yeah.
Yeah, there was the green one and the blue one and the purple one, the big, you know, like the size of a fucking computer now.
Yeah.
And doing like, you know, like all that weird stuff, and, you know, backwards delay.
Yeah.
And I never got into drugs or anything, but once in a blue moon I'd smoke pot. And I remember I was like, I wonder what this would be like if I smoked weed. And so I just remember being like, whoa, I can like touch the guitar notes right now, man. This is crazy. And just like doing delay and, you know, like in perpetuity, like, or looping stuff, and just being like, if I loop this guitar progression, I can play over it. Like, again, whoa. And so
that's how I learned how to play solos.
But that's great. At least I bet you have impeccable timing though.
No, not bad.
Okay.
It's interesting. Like, I feel like the time, like, for me, like, timing has gotten a lot better with the, like, learning home recording and that aspect of things, and like constantly playing to click, and, you know, honing that skill, and just recording in general, like, brought that about. I haven't done too much with the looping. That's something to try.
Before
it's
that
fun.
Before that Line 6 pedal, I had a Tascam 4-track with the tape, the cassette 4-track, right?
Oh yeah.
And so I would like record a riff, and then I would be able to loop it or just keep playing it, and then I'd, you know, write the second guitar part over it, and that was just like, here I can play a lead, I can do a solo, and that's kind of how I learned. Was like, oh, this sounds good with that riff, you know.
That's how you write 2 guitar parts. Yeah. I remember early on kind of discovering that, like in my first band, being like, wait a minute, so if I'm just playing G, D, A, someone else could be doing this whole other thing, you know. That's probably before.
It was like eye-opening. I definitely have tapes at my parents' house of me playing everything.
Yeah.
Like I played drums on it, like on a 4-track. And at that time, I didn't really know how to bounce tracks. So I just like put a live mic in the room and played along to the guitar riff.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, these sound like shit, but it taught me how to like play with other people, even though it was myself. And then like, you know, play like, you know, complement other instruments, you know?
Yeah. And that's a natural progression to have too. And you need those talents as musicians to be able to go like, okay, you can hear in your head, like if you're playing a major 5th, I could come in with the major 3rd and we could harmonize there.
I had no idea what that was. I still don't.
Shit.
So
yeah. I don't know, I think I made that up. But
it sounded good.
Yeah, it did. Definitely sounded good. It sounded pro.
But those are those little cheat things, man. A Tascam. I never had one, but I have friends that did. I mean, that's how everybody wrote then.
Yeah.
And
I still have it.
It's probably a collector's item now.
I still have it. A friend of mine was using it because she was going to try to use it as like a tape delay. Like, I don't know how she was going to use that as a tape delay, but she was like really resourceful, like kind of techie person. And she was like, oh, I'm going to try and mess with this. And she was going to try to run like samples and synth shit through that. I was like, all you.
No shit.
Yeah, the Tascam, I had a roommate that had one, and that was how like early Darkest Hour stuff, like trying to write, like, because I didn't have like all of the theory I'd taken through, like, because I was in orchestra and played like violin in middle school, or elementary school, middle school, and high school.
Yeah.
Like the theory was in one ear and out the other. Like it never clicked for me. So like having that Tascam, it was like a great way. It was like, all right, I've got this idea for like a riff. I was like, but I know there's a harmony to this, but I got to figure out where it is. So then do the tape the one track, and then like play around with it for hours on loop, like trying to like figure out, okay, well where's the third? Like, figure out the harmonies and like what sounds good. And like, that was huge.
I had a micro cassette recorder I still have with dozens of these little tapes, and I would record me whatever the idea was, and then I would play along to it, but then I could never get to the next step of recording the second part. So it's like, well, shit, I better remember that. And then I would do it backwards, and then I would record the
you'd record the lead and then
and then play the rhythm part or whatever over that, and try to like ingrain it in my brain, at least until I could get it to like band rehearsal or whatever, and be like, okay, so I'm going to play you this part on this tape, that's your part, and then this next part is my part, you know. And weirdly enough, not too much after that, maybe in my early to mid 20s, I was playing in I guess probably my only real band, where there were 3 guitar players, and it was very like you know, trying to come up with
Did all 3 of you guys have separate parts?
Separate parts, yeah.
Wow.
But it was a punk band, so it wasn't. It was pretty dumbed down. I listened to, it was the singer. It was the Dwayne Peters Gunfight. So that's the singer of that band, the U.S. Bombs.
Oh yeah, Dwayne Peters, skateboarder, right? Pro skater. Yeah.
He's it's a whole other.
Yeah. Oh, I know.
And so he had a band called the Dwayne Peters Gunfight, and we had 3 guitar players. And so for whatever reason, I was just listening to the album that we did for the first time in I don't know how long, only because his it's so incestuous at times. But Corey Parks, his ex-wife and baby mama, and we were just at Ricky Rackman's wedding together about a month ago, and we were talking about that era. And I said, oh, you know, your son is on this album, and I couldn't remember what part it was a baby then. It's these little vocal splices of this kid talking. So I'm listening to the album to hear where he is, to go in this song at 90 seconds. Here you can hear him. And so I was listening to it. This was like maybe a week ago, and I'm listening, going like, some of this is cool, like for 3 harmony parts, and some of this is fucking garbage. But
what was the impetus behind wanting to have 3 guitar players?
Okay,
in the band.
That wasn't my idea. That was so Madcap ran its course. Ironically, one of the last shows Madcap did, we had the Generators on the bill at the Knitting Factory in Hollywood, and they were looking for a guitar player, and they had a tour starting like 6 months, whatever, soon, and it was a full European tour, like 8 weeks, and I'd only been over there for like, you know, 5 shows, 1 show at a time, and I was like, I'm in, fuck it. And the package of the tour, this was the beginning of 2005, and I only know that because I just pulled it up. So it's 2005. So it was Mad Sin, the Psychobilly band, the U.S. Bombs, some other bands, and the Generators, and it was a big package. And all the venues we played were like, you know, like 800 to 2,500. They were like decent sized venues all across Europe.
Yeah.
And so I went over there, and I think by that point I did an album with the Generators or whatever, and then we went over there, and I somehow reconnected with the U.S. Bombs guys because I'd met them when we played together when I was in PBR in high school. And Carrie, the guitar player who I talked to fucking last night, is like the sweetest guy on earth. and they were like, "Hey, we remember you," and they had a band on their label on Disaster Records, and the singer, this girl band, the singer was my girlfriend. I don't even want to get into any of that.
Uh-huh.
But so I knew Dwayne sort of intermittently, like I would see him every year for the last like 6-7 years, and so he knew me. And at one point I even played in his nephew's band when I was in high school. This band called The Worthless, and just all these little punk rock bullet points.
Yeah.
And so when I went to Europe, Dwayne was secretly using drugs again and trying to hide it from his band. And so he was like, "I know you, you're that guy from that band, and you used to date the girl in the band that I signed, and I remember you, and now you're playing guitar in the band. Okay, you fucking weirdo, you kook." And I'd be like, and I was a fan. I'm still a fan, or I was, or whatever. And I was like, "Whoa, okay, cool, sure, Dwayne Peters." And I'm 23, 2005, 20. Yeah, I'm 22, 23. And so he takes me under his wing and he goes, "I just started this other band. It's like Thin Lizzy, but with me singing." And I'm like, "So nothing like Thin Lizzy." And he's got 3 guitar players, and they had I don't remember what the deal was. Somebody quit or got fired, and we got home from this tour, and I joined the Gunfight, and we toured a bunch. Went out with the Circle Jerks and did a bunch of headlining shows.
Cool.
And that was in my sort of 7-year period or whatever in my 20s playing with Dwayne Peters, where I was in this band with him called the Gunfight for 5 years or so. We did this album I mentioned. He brought me in to do the US Bombs at one point. We did another band called the Great Unwashed. That was basically, he got in a really, his son passed away, and then he got in like this really dark headspace, as you can imagine, and also was using a lot of heavy drugs. And he's already, got some severe mental issues, and that's putting it nicely. But you know what I'm saying. And so I'm trying to air.
What label was US Bombs on again?
US Bombs initially were on Hellcat, which was
right. Okay.
Epitaph. Yeah. They were the first band signed by Tim Armstrong to that imprint. It was the US Bombs, Dropkick Murphys, and there was maybe a third band like right out of the gate, and I can't remember who it was. But for a minute, it really catapulted those bands. It gave bands like Lower Class Brats and the Generators and Madcap, it gave everybody sort of a breath of fresh air and a new life, because all of a sudden Rancid, especially, and a few of other bands, sort of brought these street punk bands into the sort of spotlight.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, the bands that now we are in or were in or are known for or are friends with were no longer playing to 150 people. They were playing to 500 people or whatever you want to extrapolate that. Yeah. And even when my first band played with the Swingin' Utters in San Diego, I remember it sold out at like 500 people. It was on that Swingin' Utters Youth Brigade split tour. And I was like 17 and just amazed at what I was like, where are these people coming from? Like, this punk scene is only so big with 500 people. Who the fuck to see Youth Brigade and Swingin' Utters? Who are these kids? And
Dude,
so
and they're still there. Like, we did a run with Youth Brigade a couple years ago, and like the shows were crazy. Like, it was like Pacific Northwest. So
I love Youth Brigade in high school. Jeez.
I fucking love Youth Brigade. Okay, the older the band got, they haven't put out anything at all since that split, the Youth Brigade Swingin' Utters split.
Okay.
But their stuff got better. Like their To Sell the Truth album in the 90s with Johnny Two Bags, who's now in Social D, who went there by way of US Bombs. That album, I think, trumps any of their other full-length albums. And then the stuff they recorded, I'm going to just fanboy here. The stuff they recorded on that Swingin' Utters split, if you get a chance, those 6 songs, I would put hands down, I would say the best Youth Brigade songs they ever wrote.
Really? Because all their 80s stuff I love, and that's how I got into Social Distortion. So it's like, those bands, I was like, high school, I was like, those are 2 really bands I was really into. And then I'm just a side note, but never mind, because I love Social D, and I came out to LA and I was like, yeah, I'm going to see Social Distortion. And I was working at KRM, which is like Epitaph's merch company at the time.
Yeah.
And I was like, yes, Social Distortion's got a new record out. We're gonna go. They're playing at the Palladium. I'm gonna go see them. I go see him, and I had to leave in like I saw them maybe like for about 20 minutes, half an hour. I had to leave just because their fan base was crazy. I was like, what is going on here? Because like in the Midwest, it was just like regular like punks. Out here, just like it looked like a what was it, cosplay fest or something like that.
Yeah.
I was like, what is
I know
like,
exactly what you mean.
you know, like people like 40s like pinup shit, and like dudes with like it was either like cosplay 50s and you know, or it was Hurley fucking bros.
Oh yeah, they definitely
like, get me out of here. I'm like, get me out of here.
Yeah, that's like a crazy thing like that I didn't realize until moving to California was like on the East Coast, like Pennywise was a punk band. Like here it's very much like a bro-y kind of thing, like, and like kind of like the jock latched on
jock
to
rock.
that band. Yeah.
When I was in
in
Madcap, we did like a 2-week tour with Pennywise, or a run with them, and it was probably the scariest audience ever. We were in Sacramento and we got bottled, and they were serving glass bottles, and I remember my singer, he's a brand new Telecaster, and somebody hit his telly with it and it exploded and left a big knot in the guitar, and he was like, I think we're done. You know, I think that's the end of our set. And that audience, even Bad Religion and Social Distortion, these bands that we think of as punk bands, some of the audience in Southern California or on the West Coast especially can be really
it just
really meat-headed.
That's what it seemed like. And I was like, oh my God, this isn't like what I necessarily expected, because I'd seen them for years in the Midwest and it was like a different crowd. I mean, you'd have some like rockabilly-ish people for Social D, but it was like a mix of people, you know? Like,
And Social D is one of those, they're one of those bands where their audience is very eclectic. But having been to shows to see them at the Palladium and House of Blues, etc., I know exactly what you're talking about. Everybody looks like they walked out of like a rockabilly
I was like, this is Happy Days? What's going on here? I walked in the wrong fucking show.
Yeah, it's definitely a thing there for sure. And then the original drummer, Derek O'Brien, who's on Mommy's Little Monster and some of that mainliner material, we played together later in the Generators, did a record together, and we would just drill him. We'd just be like, dude, tell us Social Distortion stories, and he'd be like, shut the fuck up, you know. And he was the drummer in the Another State of Mind tour with Youth Brigade, and they did that documentary.
That's how I got into it.
Which, as a kid, I modeled my whole teenage years after Another State of Mind and like Suburbia and all that shit.
I watched that. Yeah, it's crazy. I watch those. Yeah, all the time.
Yeah, and those are still like TSOL, still one of my favorite bands. Social D, still probably one of my favorite bands. Youth Brigade, I love all that shit. Still, that's why when Fred was like, "We got to get you on and talk about punk rock," I was like, "I'm in." I was like, "Please don't make me talk about Hair Nation or like Bang Tango or anything like that. I want to talk about the Adolescents and stuff instead." The Agnew brothers.
So that's where we're going to leave off this week. Kind of got a little bit of a cliffhanger. You know, what happens with the journey with Dwayne Peters. So I have to tune in next week to find out, and also, get some more insight on, how did Ace go transition from, being in all of these punk bands to ending up in, acts like Faster Pussycat and LA Guns, and it's a great story. So tune in next week, and we'll talk to you then.